Okay. Hi, guys. My name is Bri Kimberly. I am a nurse coordinator here at NKC Health and Community Health and Wellness. We have a great presentation for you today. We have Dr. Ram Chettiar. He is a child and adolescent psychiatrist at Children's Mercy, Kansas City, with a faculty appointment as a clinical associate professor in pediatrics at the University of Missouri, Kansas School of Medicine. He completed his residency in psychiatry from the University of Missouri, Kansas City, and a fellowship in child and adolescent psychiatry from the University of Kansas Medical Center. He serves on the UMKC School of Medicine Council on selection, which you're doing after this, right?
Yep.
Helping kids get into medical school. So that's a big job. Um, he treats a variety of psychiatric conditions with interest specifically in bullying and the impacts of technology on mental health and sports psychiatry. Dr. Chettiar works in the outpatient psychiatry setting and is an active in educating medical students, residents, and fellows. He is in the medical advisor. He's the medical advisor for the Red Card Program KC, a bullying awareness collaboration between Children's Mercy and Sporting Kansas City, which is why we're here today to talk about bullying. And he also is the medical director for the Depression and Anxiety in Youth Day, DAY clinic at Children's Mercy Hospital. So please join us in welcoming Dr. Ram Chettiar, and I look forward to this conversation. Take it away, Doc.
Great. Thank you, Bree. And I know we've been trying to work on this presentation, getting this to you guys for quite a while. So I really appreciate the opportunity. I think it's a very important topic. I'm glad we're having these conversations. And I'll say bullying has likely impacted all of us today at some point, whatever part of the equation of bullying that you're on, or witnessing bullying, which is another thing that we'll talk about today. So thank you for this opportunity. As I mentioned, bullying has been around forever. I don't know if there was a time that bullying did not exist, but the important thing that I want to emphasize today is that we have a unique generation of young people, and I'll tell you why they're unique. And then bullying has also evolved over time. And then you put that combination together, and I think I would say we have some unique challenges to address, despite this being a longstanding issue. I have no financial disclosures today. So these are the three main things that we're going to talk about today. So first, I want to really define who Generation Z is, and these are our adolescents and young adults. Today, I'm going to talk to you about what makes this group unique, as well as the mental health challenges that are unique to this generation. We'll talk about what bullying entails, what's the recipe that goes into bullying. And then finally, we're going to talk about what do we do when ignoring fails. We always talk about ignore the person doing the bullying, but what happens when that fails? What are the next steps that we can take to combat bullying in our communities? So first, Generation Z. Generation Z is also known as iGen, as you might imagine, nicknamed by the iPhone because these kids and young adults grew up with iPhones throughout most of their lives. They're a really unique group. They're an interesting group. They're a pretty cool group, I would say. They are highly social. It's interesting. They have these kind of things that don't always make sense. So they're really social, but they prefer to work alone. They're multitaskers. This is a group you would go to if you needed to get an answer to a question right away. They're data driven. They know where to find answers. They're highly educated and they're future oriented. So these all sound like really great characteristics. Core beliefs in this generation: authenticity, diversity, and advocacy. So these are some themes that we see that these young people value very much. And I have some examples of ones up here on the screen, and you might recognize some of them. And I will say, I didn't mean to put all women up here when I was thinking about this generation. It just kind of happened naturally. But I think that also speaks to the point that women really have led this generation in many ways. They tend to be leaders. They've really kind of come up and made their presence known and really are impactful in this group. This is a table that some of you may or may not have seen before, but the CDC publishes this periodically, and it's the 10 leading causes of death in the United States. And I want to draw your attention to three columns. You have this 10 to 14 age group, 15 to 24 age group, and 25 to 34 age group. And you can see that suicide is really prominent as far as a leading cause of death in these age groups. So we're talking pre-adolescents, adolescents, and young adults. What we also see is so suicide is in green, homicide is in orange. We sure talk a lot about homicide in the media and in our culture. I want to make the point that suicide is actually twice the cause of death as homicide in this country. So suicide is something we probably should be talking about a lot more. It's a preventable cause of death. And there's a lot of factors that go into suicide. But for young people, this is a big problem and something that we should be addressing. You can't talk about this generation without talking about social media, of course, and we see that almost everybody's using YouTube. But TikTok, Snapchat, and Instagram are the most popular social media apps in this group, and then you have many others. But all this to say that this group is highly connected online, constantly connected, dare I say, and they're often influenced by social media. Social media influencers are making a lot of money off of young people. We should kind of consider what our young people are consuming, what's being marketed towards them, because that plays a big role in their behaviors and their mental health. This table I really like because it looks at the top 5 types of celebrities by age group. So I'm a little older than each of these age groups, but I imagine when I was growing up, athletes were always kind of someone who I looked up to, or maybe some actors or musicians. And I think a lot of us can relate to that. But in young people, the most popular type of celebrity is an online celebrity or a social media influencer, which is interesting because I think a lot of adults might not recognize who those people are, but they might be some of the most impactful people for young people. And then, funny enough, last on the list is politician across the board. So maybe not as impactful to young people, but online personalities certainly are. The iPhone was released in 2007, and we saw that there has been a big change in behavior among people, particularly young people, when the iPhone was released. So here's a graph looking at teenagers not hanging out with friends. And as you can see, once the iPhone got released, people started hanging out with friends much less. So kids are not as social as they used to be. And when I tell that to people, people will say, no, they're online all the time. They're always connected with their friends, whether it be through social media or video games or what have you. My argument would be that those are not the same as face-to-face social relationships. The warmth of social interaction is likely lost when you're doing it behind a screen. Young people often misinterpret emotions of each other. Empathy is a little bit different than you might experience with previous generations. Looking at someone in the eyes is very uncomfortable with young people. If you've seen young people have these social interactions face to face, shaking hands, smiling. These are things you don't have to do behind a screen. So it's important to consider what impacts that has on social interaction and the warmth that we receive from those social interactions. As a psychiatrist, sleep is a huge thing that I pay attention to. Teenagers have always been poor sleepers. You could probably relate to that growing up because we want to stay up late. Maybe we want to hang out with friends. Now that you have technologies that people can have in their room in the middle of the night, sleep is impacted even further. So poor sleep has always been an issue, but in the past several years, it's a bigger issue, and it's likely impacting daytime functioning, as you'd imagine, whether it be focus, anxiety, depression, or other factors. And then the most connected generation is also the loneliest generation. So the iPhone gets released, and it looks like for a period of time, loneliness was actually improving. We felt less lonely, at least young people did. And then the iPhone got released. Even though they're connected with friends, internally they feel lonely inside. So you can imagine that that also leads to feelings of depression, feelings of inadequacy, feelings of anxiety. This is a graph, a survey looking at how youth rated their own mental health since the pandemic. So I want to also point out that the pandemic has had some impacts on this generation. And you can see across the board with all the areas that were tested or that were looked at, youth state that they had increased symptoms, increased anxiety, anger, annoyance. The biggest one I see here is boredom. If you know any young people, oftentimes the most common word I hear from them is I feel bored, because when they don't have that inundation with stimulation all day long, whether it be through a phone or a computer or a laptop, tablet, they often feel bored. It's almost like withdrawal from a drug when you take those away for a period of time. So this generation has been negatively impacted by the pandemic and mental health across the board. And I bring up this slide not to really harp on it, but I do want to make the point that young people also have developing brains. And you have this area noted in red in this graph or in this picture called the frontal lobe, or more specifically in the prefrontal cortex, which is our area for decision making, emotional regulation. It's the last part of the brain to develop. It's the part of the brain that rental car companies have decided they're going to keep rates high for people renting cars up to age 25, because they know that this part of the brain is developing until that area at that time period, and youth are more likely to be impulsive or get into car accidents. This is going to impact learning, and I have this picture of neuronal connections. That's how we learn. And on the right, I have a picture of synaptic connections in children. So if you see at birth, there's very few synaptic connections. And then kids are like sponges. Everything that they see or experience, they kind of take on and kind of figure out what to do with. And as you find that kids get older, there's less connections. And what that is called is synaptic pruning. Our brains then start doing a good job with getting rid of the information we don't need, keeping the information we need so that we can learn what's essential for us. And this process can be disrupted when we're on technology too much, or when we experience trauma or difficult life circumstance. All these things can kind of mess with that process, especially at young ages. So young brains are tender brains. We want to make sure we take really good care of them. I also think about like concussions in sports and football. We want to make sure that young people are protecting their brains the best way possible, because there might be longer lasting impacts. And you can see that depressive symptoms tend to rise as kids get older. So females report more depression than male adolescents, but ages 12 to 17, you're seeing kind of a gradual increase in depressive symptoms reported. So this is a big issue. We tend to see more depression as kids get older, and then it tends to level off once you hit adulthood. This is looking at treatment for adolescents with depression. So we see that the majority of adolescents are not receiving treatment. And I showed you the graph earlier about 10 leading causes of death, with suicide being a preventable cause of death, but also the second leading cause of death in this group. Well, when you have 60% that aren't being treated, I view this as an opportunity to really help our youth make sure that they're getting adequate treatment. Adequate treatment could be therapy, it could be medication, it could be a combination of both. But the most important thing is to recognize these symptoms and then kind of determine the next best steps. And that might be different for each individual. So that is painting a picture about the mental health landscape for adolescents. And as you can see, it doesn't look great, but there are lots of opportunities for improvement. So now I want to kind of shift gears and talk about how does that impact kind of where people feel or fall into the social hierarchy of things, and how does that impact bullying? So many of you may have seen the movie that I have depicted in this picture up here. This is Sandlot, which is still a great movie today. If you haven't seen it in a while, I'd recommend rewatching it. But young kids tend to value friendship. That's the most important thing. Um, Kind of funny. I always remember one of my kids when they were in preschool, and he said, "My friend pushed me at in the playground today." But everyone is a friend. It doesn't matter if they're mean or nice, but friendship is very important. By the time you start approaching puberty and then fifth grade into middle school, youth start associating with a clique. Popularity becomes more important than friendship. How others view you is more important. And here's a picture of the movie Mean Girls. So this is an oversimplified social hierarchy, but I would imagine that anyone watching this can put themselves into this pie graph very easily and quickly about where they were in middle school and high school. So you have about a third of the kids that we can call the popular group. The popular group places an emphasis on maintaining their social status. Then there's a group of people in this graph noted as 10% who are kind of in the wannabe group. That's the periphery. Those kids want to be in the popular group. They might have some friends in the popular group, but aren't fully accepted into that group. And then you have the middle status. So majority of kids typically fall into this middle status where you have a lot of friends, you're well adjusted, you're doing fine, but you're not necessarily looking for popularity in the same way that popular kids might value it, though it might feel nice if you move up into those groups. But these kids tend to do pretty well. That being said, they might have negative impressions on people that are in a higher up status as well as people that are on a lower status. And then we have this bottom group here, 7%, which are the more socially isolated kids. These are the kids that are the prime targets for being bullied or picked on. These are kids who we should identify and make sure that they're well supported because they often feel alone. They often do not get the support that they really truly need. So moving up the ladder comes with some risk. Popular kids tend to have certain characteristics that they share. Oftentimes, they're considered attractive or funny, athletic, star of a sports team, maybe wealthy or stylish. Now, when you move up the ladder, you might lose friendships along the way. It could be socially isolating. And then also moving up the ladder, you might get stuck in that wannabe group and not fully be accepted by the popular kids. You might leave that middle group that was really kind of comfortable in a way. And then that being said, popularity should not be our goal. In fact, popularity also comes with its own risk. There is increased risk of substance use in this group, earlier sexual activity, resentment by peers, just to kind of achieve that status. It might not be worth it for many kids. That being said, I think we can recognize being popular shouldn't be the goal, but boy, it's hard to convince a middle schooler of that. It's hard to convince even a high schooler of that sometimes. So, most importantly, we want to make sure that youth recognize what makes them unique, not feeling like they have to fit into a group, and then also what makes them special, what they want out of their lives, not comparing them to other people, but as individuals. So, what is bullying? Bullying really consists of three things. All bullying encounters have to have all three of these things. So, number one, someone has to be hurt on purpose. If someone is not hurt on purpose, if everyone's just having a good time, I kind of think about sometimes on the playground when kids are playing maybe basketball and there's some trash talking going on, that would be called teasing. Teasing is not bullying. And teasing in certain situations is actually just fine if everyone's having a good time. Next, bullying has to be repetitive. It has to happen on a regular basis. If it happens just once, that's something that many of us have experienced at some point in life called a mean moment. So we all can have a difficult time. Maybe we're stressed out. Maybe we didn't get enough sleep. Maybe we're going through something difficult and can maybe snap at somebody. That would be a mean moment. Again, different from bullying. And then finally, there has to be an imbalance of power. So, an imbalance of power can be a lot of things. This might be strength. It might be popularity, where you are on the social hierarchy. It might be age. Anything that would cause a real or perceived imbalance of power would qualify. Now, if there's no imbalance of power, technically it's not considered bullying. That would be just a kind of a general peer conflict where two peers have an equal balance of power and they're not getting along. So I like to make that distinction because sometimes we label things as bullying when they're not, and I think it's just important that we have these labels correct. Not to say that a mean moment or conflict or teasing are not appropriate as well. Those in certain contexts may also not be appropriate, but they are technically different from bullying. So there's five main types of bullying that we talk about today. I, for many years, we talked about the physical, verbal, and emotional bullying. Emotional bullying might be things like rejection, leaving someone out, spreading rumors, that sort of thing. More recently, we've also talked more about sexual related bullying, inappropriate behavior based on someone's sexuality or gender, sexual statements, those sorts of things. And then more recently, we've talked about cyberbullying as being a new type of bullying. So cyberbullying can be anything that is done online, sending or posting things, group chats where people talk about people in negative ways, or exclusion from group chats as well. So, in this bullying scenario, there are people who do bullying, there are people who are targets of bullying, but it's important that we don't use labels to identify a child's behaviors because things are typically more complicated than that. So, children can be a bully sometimes, they can also be a victim sometimes. But if you label a child a bully or a victim, they tend to take that on and tend to feel like that is who they are and maybe something that they can't get out of. Ideally, we want to identify situations and not label people. So rather than saying the bully, it might be better to say the child who bullied or the child who was bullied. So those are probably a little bit more kind of a progressive approach to helping kids understand that they can be beyond something more than the bully or more than the class clown. So the bully recipe obviously includes the person doing the bullying and the person who was bullied, but I think we sometimes forget about the other people who are involved in this scenario. 21% of the time, there is someone who assists the person doing the bullying. 20% of the time, there are kids who reinforce. So maybe they laugh or support the bullying. These days, you see people out with their phones taking videos of the person being bullied. Majority of the time, there are these people who we call outsiders. They are present. They don't necessarily support the bullying. They might not be providing feedback, but what we might not realize is creating an audience also encourages bullying behavior. So we have those outsiders, and then about 25% of the time, you have kids who can defend. So defending might mean sticking up to the person doing the bullying, or it might be looking after the person who was being bullied. Defenders are really special kids. I don't try to encourage everybody to be defenders. Certain kids can be defenders, and certain kids, in reality, probably can't be defenders. You have to be at a certain level on that social hierarchy sometimes to be defenders, or it's going to backfire. If someone was in that bottom group that is a target for bullying and tries to defend, sometimes they might be putting themselves at higher risk for injury or being bullied or retaliated against themselves. So we do have to be careful. It is a complicated situation. But what we really try to do is focus on these outsiders. The outsiders, as I mentioned, are present in most cases where bullying is occurring. And the outsiders are ones who can really make an impact in these bullying situations. And that's what our Red Card program is about at Children's Mercy and through Sporting Kansas City. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. Now, with bullying patterns, more often than not, there is one person who's bullying multiple individuals. That person, as you might imagine, may have been bullied themselves. They might have a difficult life. They might have reasons that they act out in the way they do. Maybe there's problems at home, what have you. 30% of the time, people might be targeting one individual. That individual might be at a high risk for being bullied. Maybe they have poor social skills. Maybe they have emotional reactivity where it's easy to get a rise out of them. And then several perpetrators might bully that individual for entertainment purposes. Bullying is usually verbal. And then traditional bullying that we see with that physical, emotional, that sort of thing is on the decline a little bit. It's still highly present, but it is moving in the right direction. That being said, cyberbullying does appear to be on the rise. Now, bullying varies based on the type of bullying that happens in the school setting. As I mentioned, verbal bullying is the most common form, and that could be through name calling. It could be rumors, and then you have these other forms of bullying that many of you have experienced yourselves, or been a part of, or at least witnessed. Another important point that I don't think gets talked about enough is that bullying is a gendered phenomenon. And what I mean by that is there are unique patterns of bullying when we break it down by males and females. Some people are surprised to see that females are more involved in bullying than males, typically. Um, we see that that really tends to be skewed by online bullying or cyberbullying, which is much more prominent in female groups. And then there are these other differences outside the school. We see males are bullying a little bit more. In the classroom, males are bullying a little bit more. School bus, certainly, you see males picking on people a little bit more. So there are gendered differences there. Other considerations. So gendered bullying, when we talk about boys bullying boys or girls bullying girls, sometimes it's to gain status or resources. So there's some sort of kind of thing to be gained when you see same-sex bullying. Also, cross-gendered bullying, so males bullying girls, for example, might be an immature attempt at courtship. Maybe they think that this is a way to flirt, but they don't know how to do it any better than that. There might also be relationship coercion or control. So there's some kind of factors to consider with cross-gendered bullying. Youth can also be targeted based on real or perceived sexual or gender orientation. And that's where we see LGBTQ groups being targeted at higher rates than other groups, which in some ways also translates to higher rates of mental health issues in those groups as well. Male to male bullying tends to be a bit more physical in nature on average, and female to female bullying tends to be more relational in nature. So the emotional, the cyberbullying, and that sort of thing. And I bring this up to make a point that if we know where bullying is occurring, if we know why it's occurring, we have more of an opportunity to address it. And we can address it with the person doing the bullying. We can also address it with the people being bullied. So it's just important to kind of have an idea of how these things occur and why they occur. So cyberbullying is a big deal. It started with a note. So in the classroom, I remember when I was growing up, kids might pass notes. A teacher might intercept that note, and if the teacher was really mean, they might read that note out in class. And then it ended there. They'd probably throw it away. People might get a laugh. Somebody might get embarrassed, and we move on. But cyberbullying is quite different from that. So now you don't have a teacher intercepting a note. Bullying is occurring basically at any age somebody has a device. Average age for a child to get a phone right now is age 10. That's going to continue to go down into younger age groups. Group chats are a big area that we see bullying behavior starting. We go to schools and do assemblies and talk about bullying in the Kansas City area, and principals tell me all the time that group chats are really the big one for the younger kids, the elementary school kids, where they first see this bullying occur. And then that persists into middle school and to a lesser degree, high school. Bullying is out, and cyberbullying is outside the view of an adult. It could be anonymous. It could happen any time of the day. It used to be that kids got bullied at school, they'd go home and they get to escape from it. With cyberbullying, you don't get to escape. It can reach a large audience very quickly. and we don't see the response of the target. So with regular bullying, you can see someone being hurt. You could see the emotions of another person. With cyberbullying, you don't see that, and that could cause cyberbullying to be a bit more relentless, a bit more ruthless in a way. So that's an important point to make when we're intervening with kids, that we want them to recognize the emotions of others, that our actions impact the emotions of others, helping practice empathy, really. There's a big connection that's been made between bullying and suicide. And I want to make the point that bullying is not the sole cause of a suicide death. We see bullying be linked to it, and it certainly can be a factor. But typically, in deaths by suicide, when bullying is involved, there are many other factors involved as well. So there are likely concerns related to depression. There might be other factors such as trauma that someone has experienced, issues in the home. People at high rates of suicide also include people with chronic medical conditions or people that belong to certain at-risk groups. A lot of people who get bullied do not seek help from an adult. So this table is showing you the percentage of kids who get bullied tends to be highest in middle school, and it tends to get better as we get older. So in middle school, if a child is being bullied, I often tell them, hey, have some hope, hang in there. This is going to get better. Kids are pretty immature in middle school, and as they get kind of more comfortable with themselves and who they are and who they want to be, and that frontal lobe continues to develop, we tend to see less bullying over time. That being said, when bullying occurs as kids get older, adults are notified less and less often, which also means that kids are often dealing with this on their own. They tend to isolate, they tend to internalize the stress that the bullying causes. And if you remember the graph I showed earlier, depression symptoms tend to increase as kids get older. So as kids get older, we're seeing more and more depression, rates of depression. And then in this bullying situation, they're also more isolated and feel alone and don't feel like they have the help that they need, which is something that we should consider in kids that are going through it at older ages. A lot of reasons kids don't ask for help. These, in some ways, might feel pretty obvious, but they might feel helpless. Maybe they're being bullied and they feel like this is a situation that I'm not going to overcome. Some kids even feel like they deserve it because they are lower on that ladder, unfortunately, and they feel like this is just what happens to people like me at the bottom. They might fear backlash. So obviously, if someone stands up to someone doing the bullying, there might be some retaliation there. Humiliation when you ask for help is a real thing, social isolation, and then a fear of rejection. So if you stand up to the person doing the bullying or you ask for help, you might get rejected from a peer group. And as we know in middle school and high school, acceptance into peer groups is very, very important. So this is where the Red Card campaign comes in. So Red Card is a collaboration that Children's Mercy does with Sporting Kansas City. We go to schools, we have assemblies where we teach kids about bullying. We talk to the bystanders, who are those outsiders who are witnessing bullying, and try to empower them to call it out when they see it. Kind of like a referee in a soccer game might use a red card for a serious offense and call out a foul, which would then kick the person out of the game as well as the next game. So we consider bullying a red card offense, a serious offense that people have a role in addressing if they see it happening around them. Ultimately, we want to create a culture where everyone is accepting of each other. We stand up for each other. We take care of each other. And you can create a really, really nice, warm, strong community that way. And it really starts with the schools where we're seeing bullying starting. We used to do this red card campaign in high schools and a little bit in middle schools, and we said, you know what, high school might be too late. We need to start in elementary school and create this culture early on. So that's what we're doing now, and so far it's been a really well-received campaign. At these assemblies, we bring the Sporting KC mascot, Blue, who's really the star of the show. We typically bring a Sporting Kansas City player and a Sporting KC announcer, and we have a good time, but hopefully the message is loud and clear that when you see sports athletes, professionals, celebrities calling out bullying, that maybe it's cool to call out bullying in our own schools as well. So that brings me to the defenders, the ones that are on the outside, the ones that feel like they can make a difference in ending bullying in their schools. What we know is peer support is a key element to school-based anti-bullying efforts. So we need to make sure everybody is on board with this. The defenders are special kids who have some unique characteristics. So they tend to be a bit more popular. They have to have a certain status to be able to defend. They have the ability to maintain social interactions and initiate social interactions. We call that social self-efficacy. So they have good social skills. They have the ability to kind of navigate these sensitive situations. They tend to show empathy toward others, especially those being hurt. Unfortunately, as we get older, we see less and less bystanders standing up to bullying. So we really want to empower these kids right from an early age and hopefully continue into upper middle school and high school to stand up to the bullying. So when we talk to bullying bystanders, a lot of kids say, I don't know what to do. I see it happening. I'm a little scared. I'm not sure how to help these situations. I certainly don't want bullying to happen in my school. What do I do? So, number one, we don't want to kind of create an audience for the bullying. We certainly don't want people to participate because if the heat rises in the situation, that makes the situation more exciting and bullying tends to persist. We don't want someone to retaliate or respond negatively. So if we retaliate, maybe we say something back, maybe we get aggressive back toward the person doing the bullying. That tends to perpetuate bullying, and you might get it even worse next time. Responding privately to the person who is bullying is helpful. It might help them kind of check their own actions, kind of reflect on how their actions are impacting others, but only if it's safe to do so. We don't recommend doing this if you're putting yourself at danger in these situations. And then this is a big one, I think, following up with the person who is targeted. That person in the moment, especially young people with developing prefrontal cortexes, often feel alone. They feel like this is their future. They can't see a world where things get better oftentimes. That you might hear the phrase "it gets better." In these groups, they won't believe you because this is all they know and this is their reality. So helping someone understand that you don't support the bullying behavior, you're available as a support, you can find help if they need, you're there for them. It goes a really, really long way in these situations when someone might otherwise feel hopeless. To stand up to the bullying, we always tell people ignore. And in fact, ignore is probably the best thing to do to start. Ignoring does help a lot of the time. But if you can't ignore, if ignoring is not going to cut it and they keep going after you, a short, simple phrase such as stop can be very effective. The problem is we have to do this in a calm voice, in a confident voice, and if someone is being bullied, it can often be a scary situation, and that can be hard to do. Another thing that you could do is make a joke. So, for example, if the person doing the bullying makes fun of your hair, you could say, yeah, my hair kind of does look funny, doesn't it? What do you think my next hairstyle should be? Something like that. It's not what the person doing the bullying expects you to say. You're not giving them the reaction that they're looking for. You're also showing that you're not bothered in the situation. I will say making a joke in that heated moment can be really difficult. So sometimes we plan these, we prepare these with some of our patients who we see. We kind of work through scenarios and then we play it out. And then in the moment when emotions are high, they can pull out that joke and it might land a little bit better. As we talked about earlier, there are different places and times that bullying occurs, especially in the school setting. Avoiding hotspots is helpful, certainly. Sticking with friends so that you're not alone might put you at a lower risk for being bullied in a situation. Knowing how to get out of a bullying situation. So maybe that is taking a different path home when you're walking home, if that's where it's occurring. Being around an adult or near an adult so that you're less likely to be bullied. things like that. And then reporting to an adult is always an important strategy, particularly if safety is at risk. We want kids to feel comfortable to go to adults for help. We don't want adults to be dismissive. I see many times schools are inundated with these concerns for bullying, and many times kids tell me that the school doesn't care, or they try to reach out to an adult and they've been dismissed. And that's the worst thing that a kid can hear. When you go to the person that we tell you to trust, an adult who can help, when they feel dismissed, it could be a really big deal. They might not go to the adult the next time they need them. So assertive phrases, which we also practice in sessions when I'm talking to kids who are going through bullying, are short, simple phrases that take the emotion out of it, take the personal attacks out of it, and really try to put an end to the bullying quickly. So not cool or knock it off are really important ones that you can use. That was not funny. That was mean. If you can say that calmly and confidently, someone who's doing the bullying might check themselves. Assertive phrases do not put down or attack the person who's doing the bullying. That's very important. And then they have to be done in a calm and confident voice. If you say the assertive phrase in a crying voice or a worried or scared voice, it does not land the same way and it doesn't quite work. So these again are things that we should probably practice with kids so that they know when to bring them out and that they can do them confidently when they need them. There are some academic impacts of peer victimization. This peer victimization or bullying impacts kids functioning in school. So we see that grades go down. We see that these kids tend to have a harder time with social adjustment. School attendance goes down. You might avoid school. You might see that your child is having stomach aches every Sunday evening or every morning, and that could be a sign that there are issues going on at school. So they might be homesick, but in reality, their body is just reacting to the significant trauma and stress of being bullied. Social competence tends to be lower. Self-esteem can be lower. That social self-efficacy, navigating complex social situations can be lower. And then internalized problems. So these are kind of invisible problems, things that people feel on the inside. Sadness, depression, anxiety, somatization. So this is like body physical reactions to stress. Those are the headaches, the stomach aches, loss of appetite, things like that. Supportive people can mitigate risk. So when youth who are being bullied feel that they have supports, people that they can trust, they tend to have less mental health impacts. Just the simple feeling that you have a best friend reduces both internal and external behaviors from students who have been bullied, which is really incredible to think. Even if that best friend's not involved in the situation and you're being bullied, just the perception that you're not alone really holds value in these situations. High parental emotional support. So when a parent has regular communication with their child, when the parent understands their child's emotions, when that parent validates that child's emotions, that tends to decrease depressive symptoms, emotional and behavioral problems associated with bullying. And then teachers, just the feeling that a teacher cares is so important for kids. And if that child does not feel that their teacher cares, they may not feel as safe and secure in school, which also means they may not perform as well in school and achieve to their optimal ability for the sole reason of school, which is really to get an education and have a good time and meet some friends and kind of real world things we're trying to teach our kids to do. Doesn't happen as much if they do not feel that their teachers care about them. So there are some laws and policies around bullying. U.S. Department of Education, Office for Civil Rights says that schools have to eliminate hostile environments, and they have to take steps to prevent harassment from occurring. But what does that mean? And I will tell you, I don't know. I don't know what that means exactly. So all 50 states and DC have anti-bullying legislation, but there are no resources provided to schools to improve school climates to address bullying. So the impact of this legislation, honestly, is not fully clear. There's no good data to support that this legislation has made a big difference when it comes to bullying. That being said, it is interesting to note that anti-bullying legislation in schools covers cyberbullying when it's done on school property, cyberbullying when it's done on school-sponsored devices, or during times of school transportation. So there are certain things that the school can and should be involved in when it comes to cyberbullying, if they have things happening on their property or on their devices. When all feels hopeless, the bullying is persisting, we've tried everything, and it's still happening at school. How do we approach the school? That's the next question. So one, every school has an anti-bullying policy. It's important that people be aware of those policies if they were ever to need them. And then approaching a teacher or a counselor is a really good first step. It's hard to know sometimes what the teacher or school has done to address the bullying. Maybe they've done a lot and the parent was just not informed of it. From there, you can escalate to the principal, superintendent, even the Board of Education, and then it can go to the Federal Office of Civil Rights. So this can continue to be escalated as needed. Typically, it does not need to go that far. Typically, between teacher, counselor, and principal, we can figure this out. So having good communication with the school, understanding that the school is a resource and not the enemy and can be supportive in the care of your child, I think is really good. And then also keeping a record of things that have occurred. Documentation can be really helpful when we're addressing these things. Otherwise, it can turn into a he said, she said situation that sometimes can just become very frustrating where we don't really get the results that we want. Bullying prevention programs exist in some places. They are not required, but we find that when places have bullying prevention programs, bullying rates are improved. This can include peer victimization education, so bullying education, and this should be conversations and discussions between teachers and students. Remember that if a teacher cares, or if the child perceives that the teacher cares, they feel safer and more secure. Peer support for student victims. So that means making sure that the person who has been a victim of bullying isn't just separated from their class for safety or isn't just told, yeah, we'll take care of it, but that they have their own support for what they've gone through. Disciplinary strategies that are well defined. Sometimes we find that certain kids get different treatment than other kids. Information for parents to combat bullying. So just helping parents understand where bullying is occurring and what they can do to support it. And then practicing bullying prevention skills, kind of like I'd mentioned before, working on these assertive phrases, getting out of the hot spots, what to do in these situations so that when it occurs, kids are confident and they can manage it well. So just to summarize, these are the three skills I really try to emphasize with kids that are at risk of being bullied. Building assertiveness, that's the confidence, that's the being able to handle situations when they arise. Improving social skills. Sometimes it feels a little kind of strange or maybe uncomfortable to talk about social skills or identify when a child has poor social skills. But the honest truth is, good social skills are going to get you a lot further in life. You're more likely to find friends, you're going to be secure in your relationships, and you're going to be less of a target for bullying. So if a child can improve their social skills, that can go a long way to minimize bullying. And then strengthening self-esteem. And this comes back to helping a child understand what their strengths are, that they're a unique individual. It doesn't matter where they are on that ladder, but that they are a special person with value just as much as the next person. So helping someone recognize their worth and strengthening their self-esteem also goes a really long way to minimizing bullying, as well as minimizing the mental health impacts of negative experiences in their lives. So I love this quote that I'll read to you. I've learned that people will forget what you said, People will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. Maya Angelou. And I think this is very true. I can go back to a dozen interactions I've had as far as back as middle school, and I can tell you how I felt in those moments. I have no clue what score I got on what test in middle school. So people will always remember how you made them feel. So it's maybe a good idea if you have a memory of positive things, or people remember you for their positive things rather than the negative ones. And then Sue Ellen Freed has passed away. She was a bullying prevention activist and educator in Missouri, actually. And she says, "Sticks and stones will break my bones, but words will break my heart." So we always talk about sticks and stones will break my bones, but words will never hurt me. That's honestly just not true, because words are very powerful. Words have meaning. And words should also be addressed, probably just as much, or maybe in some ways more than physical aggression. So with kids, it really boils down to this: treat everyone with respect. You're going to do okay. And it's a pretty simple strategy. If all kids can treat each other with respect, bullying goes away. It just simply does not occur. And then a lot of times they're getting some of this from their parents. So it's very important that parents model good behavior and be a good example for kindness. And then I talk to a lot of clinicians, and with clinicians, the important thing is that we screen for bullying. We're probably not doing it enough. As I mentioned, a lot of times these symptoms are internalized. So if we can make sure that we just ask the questions, you'd be surprised what kids are willing to share with you. And if we can screen for it, then we can address it. We can come up with strategies to build those assertive phrases, to build a plan to minimize the bullying, because the bullying is impactful. It does hurt people. You carry it with you, and everyone suffers because of it. Person being bullied, the outsiders witnessing the bullying, and the person who's doing the bullying. Everybody is impacted. So that's all I have today, and I appreciate your time and sticking with us. And hopefully, you got something from this and can continue to pass along this message in your communities. Thank you.
Thanks, Dr. Chettiar. So much good stuff. And like you mentioned, like I remember the visceral feeling, like in high school and elementary school, those experiences you had, just that feeling was so intense. And I have a 17-year-old now, and there's times when she's upset about something at school, and I'm just like, I totally remember how that was, dude.
Yes.
It's crazy.
It's very powerful.
Yeah. I do have a question. So is there such a thing as sibling bullying?
Mm. Yeah, interesting. There can be. There absolutely can be. So with siblings, you can have a power differential, certainly, because there is age and probably some size differentials. Maybe there is some stuff related to social hierarchy, where someone is kind of considered a cool kid and maybe someone doesn't feel like they're as high on that social hierarchy. So yeah, sibling bullying does occur. Now, we have to be careful because sibling rivalry, I think, is different than sibling bullying, and you're going to have conflict in sibling relationships. It's a unique relationship. But if this feels pretty one-sided and you feel that somebody on one end is really kind of taking the brunt of it and it's impacting their well-being, yeah, that needs to be addressed, just as a bullying situation might.
Okay. Okay. Also, is there, you mentioned like sexual bullying. So is there a fine line between that type of bullying and, let's say, trafficking?
Yeah. Trafficking is a we could have a whole nother talk
Another
about
presentation
that.
on that, couldn't we?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So and in the context that I'm talking about it in this presentation is more kind of pure kind of peer interaction, whereas trafficking could theoretically be peer interaction, but oftentimes is something different, where you might have adults or even strangers or online people that you don't know. In these situations, we're talking about relationships where people tend to know each other because it's a repetitive behavior and they're picking on them. But bullying and trafficking are both huge. And in fact, we probably don't talk about trafficking issues enough as well. And that's a very scary thing, especially with online activity that's often out of the periphery of adults' view. So I'm glad that you brought up the trafficking because we didn't touch on it, but hugely worrisome when we talk about safety of young people.
And I've seen some presentations on trafficking, and I think there's just so much more to it than what parents think of as just the creepy white van. I've got candy, I got puppies inside, come take a ride with me. And so much of it is behind closed doors, as you mentioned, with phones. Um, so parents, highly recommend looking into that. We have some great speakers locally that speak on trafficking. So a lot of it is just like pictures or context that's been used against someone else to threaten them. So then they continue to go along with the situation, which puts them at risk. So yeah, check that out.
Exploitation of children is very easy,
Yes.
unfortunately, these days. Yeah.
Um, so you touched a little bit on this. So long-term effects of bullying. So let's say that there's a kid that's been pretty significantly bullied throughout their education as a younger adult or as a child. Early adulthood,
Mhm.
down the road into adulthood, what are we seeing from that? Is that mostly just psychological anxiety, depression type symptoms?
Yeah, so there's two aspects to this: long-term effects of being a victim of bullying, and then long-term effects of being the person who is doing the bullying. And when you compare those two groups, actually the person doing the bullying has worse long-term effects.
Interesting.
We see the person who is doing the bullying tends to have more relationship type problems. We see it occupational success tends to be worse, more substance use, more criminal activity. All of those things are hugely impacting the person doing the bullying. Now, the victims of the bullying obviously are also impacted. And this tends to be in the realm of more traditional kind of mental health things that we see in our clinic. So maybe higher rates of depression, anxiety, the self-esteem issues, and then confidence. So what does this look like in middle school, high school, and college? Maybe they feel inadequate. They don't feel like they can take on something, apply for that job, or feel that they deserve the things that are available to them because they've just kind of been knocked down so many times. Then we talk about resiliency. So sometimes kids have been bullied or experienced difficult things. Some kids, for whatever reason, are resilient and they are able to overcome those things, and maybe they grow from those things and are stronger because of it. Ideally, if we address these things at younger ages, my hope is that we can build resiliency in these kids so that they can overcome some of the long-term impacts that they might have otherwise experienced.
Sure, and just develop those coping skills that they use throughout their life. Right.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. If you guys have any questions, please throw those in the chat. I know we have a couple people on. Feel free to do that. Um, this has been very interesting. And I think it's a great topic. And so many parents, I feel, probably feel a little bit helpless. Like, how do I even know that my kid's being bullied? What do I do? And then the repercussions on my kid. So if something's happened at school and then that bully finds out that the parents are involved, is that just going to increase the bullying
Yeah.
on that level? Yeah. So
So, and I might mention related to that, this ideally starts before bullying occurs. I think it's just so important that parents really have a good sense of how their kids are feeling at school, what's going well, what's not going well. Because if you don't have those open line of communications early, it's a little bit harder, maybe embarrassing in some ways for a child to say that they need help or that they're experiencing something difficult at school. So it starts before this difficult conversation, with conversations early on. I always encourage families to be open with how they're feeling, how they're doing. Parents as well, because parents are human, and if they share their own vulnerabilities, they don't have to air out their baggage, but if they share their own vulnerabilities with kids, kids are more likely to do that as well.
and it's not just kids that get bullied
That's
either,
right. That's
right?
right.
that
Yeah.
can happen throughout your life. So these are honestly great skills to have. Um,
Excellent.
uh, Comment, thank you for this presentation today. Um, this parent has already emailed their school principal and to see about getting the program brought to their elementary school. So that's great. Yes.
And Red Card KC has a website where you
Okay.
can get lots of great information. Some of the stuff that we talked about today, additional resources. So hopefully that's informative and can also get you signed up for the program.
Fantastic. I really feel like there's a lot of things out there that just people just don't know about.
Hmm.
And so little presentations like this help spread the word, right?
Yeah.
So definitely talk to your administrators in your school district and let's stop this bullying. So thank you guys for joining us. Please remember that Children's Mercy has a ton of resources on their website as well. And same as NKC Health. Check out our YouTube channel, nkchealth.org for classes and events. And yeah, thanks, Dr. Chettiar.
Thank
Appreciate
you.
your time
Appreciate it.
today, sharing your knowledge, and we'll see you guys next
Absolutely.
time.
Thanks.
Bye.